The Maral of Prague, he has a commentary on Pirkei Avos. Literally, Pirkei Avos means the chapter of our fathers, meaning of not the patriarchs, meaning the equivalent of those who we have to call, who transmit the values and the beliefs which are fundamental to a Jew's life and his function and his behavior. In the Maral, he chose the title for his work on Pirkei Avos, Derech Chaim. Derech Chaim, the way of life. Why did he choose this title? Because there's a verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs, where Shlomo Melech states, Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or. The ner, the candle, is the mitzvah, but the Torah is the illumination, is the light, which will explain this. Then he continues, the derech chaim, and the way of life, tochochos musa. It's to be informed about various understandings, how to constrain yourself, not to veer off. Musa means that you should be able to understandings of life that allow you to walk that straight and narrow path and not to be overwhelmed and driven by our animalistic drives. So before we go and explain the verse, the way the Maral explains it, he explains something interesting. A human being of all living species is endowed with intelligence. Every living species other than human being, its functions based on its DNA, and the DNA determines its instinct. And that's why each species behaves differently and evolves and develops differently than any other species. Each species has its natural behavior pattern. The lion, the tiger, the domesticated, the undomesticated. Each one, because of its DNA, the way God created it, instinctively, it behaves differently than the other. The habitat is another different habitat. The human being is at another level. The human being was endowed with intelligence. What is intelligence? Intelligence means that to the degree that a person is able to apply himself, it doesn't come natural. It's only through our experiences of life and evaluations do we know how to navigate the field. We know how to navigate the turf. We have the ability, we have retention, we have analysis. There are many aspects to our intelligence, and based on all of them in combination, we're able to guide ourselves through life. But the natural intelligence, which is endowed to the human being, has tremendous limitation. Why? Because its guidance and its innate ability only directs us within the context of a human being, within the physical world, physicality. To be able to outside, to transcend our physicality, regardless of the genius of the mind and the potential, it cannot. You have to be taught. And the teachings, which Shlomo Melech is speaking about, King Solomon, the wise man who ever lived, these teachings are considered outside the natural realm. And this can only be communicated to us by God himself, because the Jew himself is not a physical being. In terms of our physical characteristics, our physicality, we are physical. But the innate value of a Jew is development of his spirituality, which is his soul. Ner mitzvah. What is a ner? Ner is a candle. So he goes to explain something interesting. When you have a candle, it's a receptacle. You have oil, you have a wick. Now you ignite the wick. The light only burns as long as you have the fuel and you have the wick. And you have the vessel containing the fuel and the wick. But there's an attachment between the light and the physical material of that candle, of that receptacle. So that light itself is connected to the physical. When we speak about Torah's or, that's light which is unrelated to our physicality. Meaning, you put on tefillin. To do that, you must be involved in a physical act. You wear tzitzis, fringes on a four-cornered garment. You have to have the physicality of the garment, and you must wear it on your body. It's all related to the physical. You eat matzah. It's made of certain species of grain. It's made a specific way. You must chew it, swallow it. That's called eating. The Paschal lamb. Again, this is a mitzvah, but that directly can only be brought about through our physicality. Anything which is related to our physicality has limitation. Something which is our intellect is unlimited. God endows the Jew with the ability to process something which is called Torah. Torah is the illuminator. It's absolute light, unrelated to physical. We find that at the beginning of creation, God said on the first day of creation, let there be light. What was that light? What was the source of that light? It can't be the luminaries, the sun, the stars, because they were first created on the fourth day of creation. So what was this light? This light was light which emanated directly from God. It was not connected to the physicality of the world. What did God do with that light? Once the luminaries were created, it says before man was created, he hid it away for the devoutly righteous at the end of time, that only they are able to benefit from that light. That light is a holy light. That light is not connected to anything physical. That light directly emanates from God himself. The Torah itself, which is illuminator, that's an endowment of God, which is unrelated to the physical. The mind, the intellect, it's unrelated to physical. Of course, even a person when he's not alive, he's not able, the brain doesn't work. But the basis for the intellect is the soul of the person. That's why human being is not just an instinctive being, but an intellectual being, because that's rooted in our soul. It's not our physicality. Any other thing other than the study of Torah is directly related to our physicality, which has limitation, which is finite. The mitzvah is finite. The Torah is not finite. It's infinite. Because it's not rooted in our physicality, which every other mitzvah action is rooted in our physicality. So ner mitzvah, the mitzvah is the equivalent of the receptacle with the oil and the wick, and the flame being fueled by the oil and the wick. That light is what has limitation, because it's dependent upon the fuel and the wick that fuels it. Torah is not dependent on anything. That's independent light. Therefore, it's Torah or. Torah provides light, which is infinite light. The ultimate illuminator is Torah. Now, it's interesting. We find that every act which is sinful has to do with our physicality. That's within the realm of the physical. We say, God created the evil inclination, and he created the Torah as its antidote. Why is the Torah the antidote to the evil inclination? It's the study of Torah. It's not doing mitzvahs. Doing the mitzvah is not the antidote to the evil inclination. What is the evil inclination, and what is he rooted? He's rooted in our physicality. That's where he's rooted. As a result of that, the mitzvah itself being related to the body, where the body itself is tainted with the evil inclination, it's not outside of the body. It is the body. Therefore, it cannot control or incapacitate the evil inclination because it's connected to the body. But when you study Torah, Torah is unrelated to the body. That's infinite light. It's something which transcends the body. As a result of that, that illumination, which is unrelated to anything which is physical, is able to shed a light and bring a level of clarification and internalization that the evil inclination becomes totally incapacitated. Therefore, the Torah study itself is an antidote to the evil inclination for that reason. I always mention the Chaim HaKadosh writes, when the Talmud tells us in a number of locations, I've created the evil inclination, I've created the Torah as its antidote. That's only once one studies Torah lishma, for the sake of the Torah itself. If you study Torah with an ulterior motive, then the Torah will not be the antidote for the evil inclination. The question is why? If a person studies Torah purely for the sake of God, that's unrelated to the person. So exactly as the Torah itself is or, is light, it's not dependent on anything physical. It emanates from the soul, so it doesn't share any characteristic with the body itself, with the physicality of the world. But if a person, let's say, studies Torah because he wants acknowledgement, he wants recognition, for that sake, but that need for recognition, which is ego-driven, that's physical. That means that Torah is dependent, is somehow connected with the physicality of the person. Once that happens, that Torah cannot incapacitate. That cannot be the antidote for the evil inclination. It's only Torah which is unrelated to our physicality, purely for the sake of God's glory, for the sake of the mitzvah itself. Only then does that Torah have the ability to be the antidote to incapacitate the influences of the evil inclination. Therefore, that's what King Solomon says, Ner mitzvah. The mitzvah is the ner, the light, but that light is dependent on the physicality of the person. And the physicality of the person is intermeshed with the evil inclination. Torah itself is removed. It transcends that. Therefore, that light is eternal light. We find, the Talmud tells us, that a child in utero, before he's born, in the words of the Gemara, it says, Ner doduk rosho. He has a light burning above his head, and the child in utero is able to see from one end of the world to the other. There's no obstruction. And when he has this light shining on him, and he has this level of clarity, that no barriers, there's an angel who teaches him the Torah's entirety in this setting. Now, that light above his head, and due to that light, he's able to see from one end of the world to the other. No obstruction, no obstacles. That light is just abstract light. There's nothing fueling that light. What's that light? The in utero state is a semblance of the world to come. What illuminates the world to come? It's God's presence. That's emanating from God. It's not emanating from anything physical. So the unborn child, the fetus in utero, that light, that illuminator, that's the Torah or. And that light, which is unrelated to anything physical, the angel, which is spiritual, teaches that child the Torah's entirety. That's the portion which each of us received at Sinai that we're meant to study throughout our lives. That's our potential of Torah study. That's what the angel teaches the child in utero. So that's the or. That is truly the purest light, because that light provides the understanding. That's the illumination, the elucidation of truth, because you're in the world of truth before birth. The Talmud tells us in one location, Rabbi Yochanan, in Sanhedrin, that the Torah tells us at the time of the destruction of the world, right before, by the great flood, God says, Yetza Lev Ha'odom, the inclination of man's heart, is Ra min Urav. It's evil. Literal Nurav means from his youth. But Rashi cites the Midrash, Misheninar imo. From the moment the child is cast from the womb of his mother, that's where the evil inclination attaches itself to the child. In utero, there's no evil inclination. The evil inclination only comes upon the child when he's cast from his mother's womb. So there's a beautiful moral. He explains, what does that mean? When the child is in development stage, until the child is fully developed to be who he's supposed to be, the evil inclination has no permission to in any way affect that child's life or that child's potential. It's only once the child is complete, and only when he's complete, that's why the body of the mother pushes that child into existence. Only when the person is complete, ready to embark on life, that's when the evil inclination is permitted to attach itself to the person. Because now you're complete. In utero, you're still in development. You're evolving. In that stage, and what is that state? There's that level of illumination. Who's giving that? Who's providing that illumination? It's not dependent on anything specific. There's nothing material which provides that illumination, because the child at that moment is still considered a spiritual being, because the physicality only starts functioning once he leaves the body, when he functions independent of the mother in terms system-wise. That's the understanding. So Shlomo says, Ki ner mitzvah Torah or. The mitzvah is the ner. The Torah is illumination, as we just explained. V'derech chaim tochochos. And the path to life is tochochos, is to inform you, to teach you teachings which will be able to contain you and restrain you. Because when you have an understanding of what life is, you have to engage in certain behavior patterns to temper the animal that exists within every one of us. So it's derech chaim is what is tochochos. Tochochos, as Torah tells us, tochocha normally means rebuke. It's not external rebuke. When we study behavior values, behavior patterns, which are enhancing and beneficial to us, although we're physical beings. He says something very interesting, the Maral. In Hebrew, chayim is life. Chay is life. Person, chay. We find that Yosef, before he revealed himself to his brothers, and they thought he was a pagan viceroy, he swears in the life of Paro. And he says, Chay Paro. So the vow under the word Ches Yud is Atzeri, it's Chay. He doesn't say Chay Paro. What's Chay? Grammatically, Chay is always when it's associated with something else. It's called Smichus. Chay means life that's independent of anything. Something is alive. Chay Paro means you're only alive as long as your soul's in your body. The moment your soul leaves your body, so it's Chay. The life of Paro is determined by that the soul and body should be attached. The moment there's that moment of a detachment, you're no longer alive. Chay means you live. God is called Chai, because God is not dependent on anyone. Derech Chaim. Derech Chaim is Tochochas Mutzar. As he said, the intellect alone, which man is endowed with, you can't get out of that maze. It's impossible to escape from that maze. We're confounded with the earthiness of the human being. We can act responsibly as a human being, but as a spiritual being, to transcend the physicality, we don't have the capacity. That should be ner mitzvah, the Torah or, but even that's not enough. You need tochochas chaim. You need the rebuke of life. You have to be taught the school of hard knocks, so to say, to teach you what is and what's not, what's accepted, what's not accepted. Although as a human being, you may think it's sufficient, but it's not sufficient. You have to learn the regiments of life, which is tochochas chaim. Now, there's a question which is asked, firstly by the Midrash, by the commentators, which we've mentioned the question in the past. The Jews are at Sinai, and God offers the Torah to the Jewish people. What do we say? Nasa v'nishma. We accept unequivocally the Torah. Then we read a little bit further. We read the Jews are standing under the mountain, and the Talmud tells us, the Midrash tells us, that God put the mountain over the heads of the Jewish people and gave us an ultimatum. Either accept the Torah or you'll be buried under the mountain. So the question is, we already said we accept unequivocally. We were more than willing to accept. We desired it, or we're even willing to embrace it before we even know the extent of the obligation. Why is God putting a mountain over our heads? To compel us, and it gives us an ultimatum. Either you accept, or you'll be buried on the mountain, and existence will revert back to pre-existence. Why? So the Rechaim HaKodesh gives an answer. He says, very interesting. We accepted the Torah, embraced it unequivocally, the written and oral law. However, what they couldn't accept, which they didn't want to accept, was that the rabbis are endowed with the power and authorized that they could legislate fences. That the Jews said, that we're not willing to accept. Why? There's no end to it. You know, that you could actually put a person in a straitjacket where he can't move an iota. So therefore, there's no limit to what fences could be. That we're not accepting. The fences. God says, you must accept the fences. Whatever fences the rabbis legislate, you must accept those fences. And for that reason, he put a mountain over our head. And he concludes, why? Because God was communicating to tell us, being a human being, we don't always have 100% cognizance. We don't always have clarity. You must have fences. Without fences, because of the conflicts that a human being has, being a physical being, being influenced by our physicality, it's inevitable you're going to fail. And the Torah cannot survive without fences. And because the Torah cannot survive without fences, therefore they must be in place. And the body of government who have the right to legislate and promulgate those fences, those are the rabbis. They were authorized by the Torah. And you're bound by their law. Because without fences, you cannot survive. Because why? Because as much as we're spiritual beings, we have a soul which is spiritual, but we're still living within a physical environment. The influences are still physical. Unless we wean ourselves from the physicality and we distance ourselves to take every level of precaution, not to go through that minefield, not to step on the mine, that cannot be without fences. Because due to our lack of clarity, it's inevitable we're going to fail. But that's derech chaim tochochas musar. What is the path of life? That's the rebuke of musar. That's the laws which restrain us, which hold us in check, that we don't cross many lines. We don't even get near the line to cross it. Once mentioned, the Maral says this later, Pirkei Avos, it says, if you consider three things, you'll never come to sin. From where you come, where are you going, and before who you will give a reckoning. From where do you come? From a putrid droplet of semen. Where are you going? To the location of worms and maggots. And before who will you stand? Before the King of Kings, God himself, to give a reckoning. The Mishnah uses a term, if you consider these three things, you will not come to the clutches of sin. So the Maral, the Frog answer should say, you will not come to sin. What are clutches of sin? Meaning like this, he explains, once you're in the clutches of sin, it's not so simple to extricate yourself, to pull yourself back. Person goes out on a limb, and you're at the end. And the limb is tottering, and you're about to fall off. To inch yourself back to the trunk of the tree, which is more secure, it's very difficult, because you're at the very end already. Or God forbid, a person allows himself to go into a brothel, and he's exposed to all the temptations. At that moment, you're in the clutches of sin. You're ready, the Satan has you in his clutches. You know what it means to wrench yourself out of there? It's nearly impossible. So if you want to keep your distance, not to go into those clutches, into the jaw of the lion, what you have to do is, to keep your distance, consider three things. From where you come, where you're going, and before who you will stand. That's the clutches. The derech chaim is tochochas musar. That musar, the teachings of Pirkei Avos, gives us the foresight to understand how to live an appropriate life, which always has us directly connected to a spiritual way. The values, the concepts, the behavior patterns are not related to our physicality. Those behavior patterns keep us a distance, do not allow that desire to seep into our lives, to take control of our lives. That's what it's about. So derech chaim, the way of life, the path of life is tochachas musar. It's only musar. Those are the fences. Mishlei, Proverbs, they're all Proverbs to teach us values, how to live our lives, to keep our heads way above water. Not that we're just pedaling and treading water, but rather we're way above the water. We're riding the wave. We're not beneath the surface. That's what it's about.